Welcome to Renegade Thinkers Unite, a show that will help you transform your marketing from mere messaging to programs that break the rules and make a difference. Join the movement today and learn non-traditional techniques that give you an edge. Now, here's your Chief Marketing Renegade, Drew Nizer.
My guest today is Kipp Bodnar, who is the CMO of HubSpot, a company I imagine most of you, if not all of you, are familiar with, thanks to their ubiquitous content around the idea of inbound marketing, which is a term, by the way, that HubSpot CEO Brian Halligan coined about a decade ago. So, Kipp, welcome to the show.
Drew, thanks so much for having me. Man, it's nice to take a little break from doing marketing to talk about marketing. So it's fun to be here.
It is fun. And by the way, I just checked fastcompany.com and I found an article that I wrote about Brian. We did an interview. It was in October of 2010, which that's going way back. I think it's been a good 8 years for your company.
Yeah, that is way back. I'm trying to think of what I was doing at HubSpot in 2010. I think it was like every odd marketing thing, writing a bunch of content, doing early days, startup life. It was fun.
But you were there.
I was, yeah.
Awesome. All right.
I started at early 2010, so it would have been like 6 months in or so, probably.
There you go. Well, and you host a podcast, right?
Yeah, so I'm a host of the Growth Show here at HubSpot. I have been busy, and Megan Anderson has stepped in and is doing a lot of the hosting now. But I go way back in the podcasting world. I think I started my initial podcast was probably like over a decade ago now. So I've done a bunch of podcasts off and on, some on marketing, some on technology. I did one on wine for a while. It's been a blast.
Okay, well, we're going to test my theory that podcast hosts make great guests. And see what you can do, okay?
I'm going to do my best to live up to your expectations, but I'm not going to promise anything.
So it's funny. So I had Alan Hart on the show. And in fact, we took turns interviewing each other. First of all, we enjoyed being a guest as much as we did it, but we also sort of appreciated the notion of pithy responses and all those good things.
Of course.
But, and by the way, that's a hint to all of you marketing podcast hosts out there. Kipp and I are available to be guests on your show. So, get those calls.
Yeah, for sure.
So now, speaking of interviews, that's going to be the focus of this show. On just about every episode of Renegade Thinkers Unite to date, and we're 90 plus so far, we've heard CMOs espouse the importance of building a great team. They always, what's the secret to your success? Build a great team. But we've never actually talked about the hiring process and more specifically, the fine art of interviewing. So we're going to do that on this show, but we're going to do it with a twist. And that twist is I found this blog post that Kipp wrote about interview questions, and we're going to make him answer some of those questions.
I'm going to give away some of the answers I'm looking for. But that's
exactly. All right. I'm going to ruin these questions. So you're going to have to make up a whole new set. But all right.
Capable.
So we're going to talk about. I want you to answer these questions like you were interviewing for the CMO of job. It's hard to imagine a job better than the one you have, but if there was, you would be doing it. Okay, so question number one, draw a funnel on the whiteboard showing 10,000 visitors, 500 leads, 50 opportunities, and 10 new customers. And now let's pretend you're the CMO for HubSpot, and you have to decide what your marketing team should do to improve these metrics. Which areas of the funnels would you focus on, and what would you do differently to change these results?
Yeah, so this question is, my answer is going to basically be, well, it depends, like every answer, on where you want to focus. The beauty of this is that you can focus at the top or focus at the bottom. If you look at the data, there's some glaring holes in the bottom. And, what I would do is I'd probably look at the bottom of the funnel and see that opportunity customer rate's a little weak, and I would start talking a little bit about some of the programs I could do there, sales enablement, improved marketing automation. I think there's some really interesting things you could do there. And so that would be my quick answer. The thing I love about this question is that it gets people to interpret the problem based on who they are, and there's 100 right answers. It's actually in the justification and the deep dive into like the strategy and tactics around those answers that you learn so much about how that person thinks and how that person approaches solving problems as a marketer, which I think is awesome.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I like about it is just open-ended, right? It's just, here's a scenario that, frankly, almost every marketer faces in one way or another.
Totally.
And, you know, in a lot of organizations may say, gee, I wish I had 10,000 visitors, right? But the truth is that ultimately, from a marketing standpoint and a CMO standpoint, success only comes with the 10 new customers.
Totally. But, you know, I've had some really great people answer that question and you know, if they're smart, they start talking about in the context of HubSpot, right? And they'll say, oh, well, HubSpot, well, you sell to small, medium-sized growing businesses, so you don't have big enterprise contracts. So those 10 customers, you need those to be 1,000 customers. And so we've really got to scale up your top of the funnel. And, you know, just as much as that bottom of the funnel conversion rate is so important, there's a lens that you look at this and it's like, oh, that 10,000 visits need to be 200,000 visits or 1 million visits given the right business context, right? The flip side of it is if you were selling to the Fortune 1000, right, and you had this very limited pool, 10,000 visits would be amazing. And you'd want that person to come at you and talk all about the bottom of the funnel and all about that customer conversion rate. And so I think it's best when the candidates kind of put the question in the context of the business that they're interviewing with.
And so but what I hear from this is sort of the first question out of the box. This is sort of an analytical question. You're making sure that they know how to problem solve.
Yeah, absolutely. Problem solve, have enough depth of marketing expertise that they can kind of talk in detail about the solution to that problem, and quite frankly have done their homework enough to know your business, the challenges you face, and hopefully talk about those things through that lens.
Okay, so what would be a bad answer to that question?
There's a bad answer would be you pick a stage and don't really have any substance. You know, a bad answer would be like, oh, well, I want to take that from 10 customers to 20 customers. Well, how would you do that? Well, I would send them some more email, or I would have my sales team follow up with those prospects more, or whatever that may be, right? Some kind of bland answers that are pretty unspecific and aren't driven from a track record of either trying to solve these problems before, having experience solving these types of problems before. That's kind of, I think, an example of an answer where you'd be like, all right, this person just doesn't have the perspective necessary to kind of solve these types of problems.
Doesn't have the chops. And presumably if you're interviewing for a senior marketer, they face this thing, they might say, well, this is how we attacked it in our current position. This is what we learned. Didn't work. This did work, so forth. Okay. Yeah. So question number 2, we have 2 potential designs for the homepage of our website, but we don't know which one to use. The CEO likes this one and the COO likes this one. Half the company likes one, the other half likes the other. Which one should we use? Now, are you showing an example when you show these 2? Or is that just hypothetical?
Sometimes show an example, sometimes just draw it on the whiteboard and basically do a wireframe of 2 different examples. There are a couple different ways you can approach it. But the answer here is more straightforward, right? Because the answer should be, well, the only opinion that matters is the opinion of the customer and the end user of your product, of your service, and what do they think? You know, have you done user testing? What does the user testing show? Can you run an A/B test? What are the core variables here that you would want to isolate for A/B tests or multivariate tests? And you'd want people to, this is basically getting people to think about the customer and the prospect over internal voices and trying to really assess and validate the process that they would go through to actually do that and understand what would be the definitive answer.
It's so interesting as I hear you talk about it. I'm knee deep in. I just finished Clayton Christensen's book, Competing Without Luck, and I'm almost done with Brent Adamson's The Challenger Customer, and I'm thinking about both of them as they're talking about data and the misuse of data and the reading of data incorrectly. And I'm thinking, if you ask this question to the wrong person, first of all, you could get a wrong response. In other words, if you ask which website do you like better, because that's a visceral response. And then if you measure the wrong thing, right,
Totally.
with the wrong person, because it could be, for example, you could show this website to a finance person and they don't see the thing that they're looking for right away. And they say, this doesn't work for me because there's no ROI calculator there.
Sure.
Right. So I think that's a really complex thing to figure out, right?
Well, yeah. And it's like, even websites are these complex things, right? That's why they're fun things to talk about and to debate, because even a website could even be performing on a data level really well. It could be driving the conversions that you want, but maybe is still being misinterpreted by the end user, right? By the actual prospect, that the core points you're hoping to communicate around your brand, around your product, whatever it may be, aren't coming through. And that's why it's like there's this balance of qualitative and quantitative that it really takes, I think, to make an educated choice. And I think you also want people in this case to also talk about, like, wow, websites, they're not static things. I want to continue to iterate on my website. And man, I want to make that more personalized. Is that once somebody's a customer, that's a version of the website that I really care about. And what do I want to change about this to deliver a better customer experience versus a better prospect experience?
Yeah, and I suspect it also depends greatly on the business type. I mean, if you're doing e-commerce or taking orders right on the website, that's one thing, because then you can just look at sort of conversion and customer satisfaction and how long did it take them to get to that purchase. Whereas if it's a longer sale and you're selling a software that isn't, requires a direct sale, then it's a very different experience. So anyway, we don't want to get lost in homepage design. Let's go on to the next score. All right.
Homepage design.
Oh yeah, no, we don't want to go there because that's a whole nother show and we need to talk to someone else.
Shows, yeah.
Yes. Okay. So how should you create a lead score? Let's say that you have an Excel spreadsheet with 10,000 leads from a few months back, long enough that those lead sales cycles has passed. Blah, 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 blah. Can you use this information to create a lead score? How would you do it? There was a lot of blah, blah, blah in there.
Well, a lot of blah, blah, blah. But, what you're really looking for here is, like, does somebody understand math, and are they going to talk about running a regression analysis on that data set? Like, what are the insights that they can draw from that data set, and how much detail can they actually talk about it? And this is a question, I think all these questions are very situational, right? Depending on the role that you're hiring for. I think as a marketing leader, one of the challenges you have is that the marketing teams today are just built of so many diverse roles, right? Different specialties across the board as you grow and you scale. And this is really, like, if you're hiring a marketing ops leader or a key marketing ops or kind of marketing automation person, this is a question you really want them to be able to deliver a really great and thoughtful and analytical answer on.
And these questions, you're absolutely right. These questions are really about the first three that we talked about are assuming that we're talking to someone who's going to go on the data team or the ABM team or the CRM team or something like that. All right. So now we can step back and this is a real question for you. Great. What is one of your hobbies?
What's one of my hobbies? Well, I have an almost 3-year-old. So a lot of my hobbies have deteriorated during this span of life because I have massive fatherly duties. But let's see, a couple hobbies I love cooking. We can geek out deep on cooking. Okay. Cooking, food, wine, that kind of stuff. We could talk deep about that. I have more recently gotten into a love of mechanical watches and the design and manufacturing of mechanical watches. So we could talk for hours on that too. Those are probably the two big ones right now.
So when you're asking someone a question about their hobbies, what are you really looking for there?
A lot of things. oftentimes, to give you the deep dive on this question, I want them to be interested in something that I don't have a ton of frame of reference for. It happens basically all the time because I don't know that much. None of us do. And I want to deep dive on it with them. Somebody said, I love traveling, and I went to Italy and I learned to make pasta. And I was like, great. Tell me how the Italians make pasta. Break it down for me. And I want to see if people can explain something that they have this intense knowledge about and simplify it in a way that somebody who's new to that topic can really understand it. And
interesting. So the more obscure, the better in some ways, because
totally.
Right. It gives them a chance to explain something. That's an interesting.
The essence of marketing, right, is taking something that you have all the inside baseball and knowledge of and distilling it down for a audience that's going to have very limited familiarity with it. And it's kind of hard to set up that type of question without kind of having a personal lead in and understanding that there's something that person actually has that deep expertise in, and you can have a better assessment of whether they can simplify it or not. So that is one of the things. I also just want to know, do they have fun? Are they going to be a good team member? Are they just passionate about things beyond marketing? Because if they're really passionate about something else and they talk about that in the same way that they talk about marketing, then I'm going to know that their passion for marketing is genuine and real. And I think Marketing Day is one of those things where, man, you have to have a deep passion and joy for the work you're doing to be really successful at it.
It's so true. All right. Speaking of passion, we need to take a break. And when we come back, we're going to dive into some more of these questions after I come back to one of them that we just talked about. So stay with us.
You've been listening to another great interview on Renegade Thinkers Unite with Drew Neiser. But the value doesn't end there. As a listener, you can download a free ebook from Drew, Renegade Thinkers, interviews with 11 trailblazing CMOs any business can learn from. Top marketing thought leaders and proven executives from Time Warner, American Express, and Chico's, and others. Get your free copy at renegadethinkersunite.com/ebook. For listeners only at renegadethinkersunite.com/ebook.
Okay, we're back, and my guest is Kipp Bodnar, the CMO of HubSpot, and we've been talking about interviewing and finding and using questions to help identify things. And what I like about these questions is what you're listening for is not as obvious as what's in the question. Like, what is one of your hobbies? You could just be interested in that, but I love the fact that you're really looking for them to simplify, because that's so important. And if it takes them 100 words to describe something in a very short period of time, marketing probably may not be for them. But I also love the passion. You're absolutely right. I mean, this is a hard, very hard field, and it's a constantly changing one. And if you're not really into it, there's probably easier ways to make a living.
Oh yeah, you got to be day to day in the weeds of marketing to be great at it today, and that means you got to love it. I'm very upfront with people. Everybody I interview, it's like, you got to love marketing to work with us and to work here and to be successful today.
Very cool. Okay, so Kipp, what brands do you like or follow on social media, and why?
I'll give you my straight up answer, and then I can talk about the question. I really love the work that Tristan Walker and the Walker Company are doing right now. They're probably my numero uno. So Tristan was a gentleman who while he was at Stanford, basically worked at Foursquare back in the early days of that boom of the web, and has since started basically a company that holds a bunch of umbrella brands for grooming products for black people, essentially. So hair trimmers, conditioners, shampoos, all that kind of stuff. And I think the way that they interact with their consumers, market the product, but also drive the right brand perception and awareness, I think they're doing a really good job. So shout out to them. And I just want to know, in asking somebody these questions, I just want to know that, one, they like marketing enough to follow brands and have the insight around what good marketing looks like from companies that aren't like their company. And I want to know that they can understand what good marketing is. And then I want to ask them some follow-up questions of like, oh, okay, you said that company was, had this really interesting post that had a ton of audience engagement. Like, how would we think about doing something similar for our business? Like, how would you think about that? So that they could see a good idea in the world and understand how to like learn from that and reshape that into something that they could do.
Love it. It's true. I mean, if you sort of think about marketing when you leave the office and you enjoy it, again, it's a good question to find out. Now, before we move on to that, what are the handles for Tristan Walker? Because we can include those in the show notes.
Yeah, it's Tristan Walker is his Instagram, and then Walker and Co is the other handle for all the core brands. And so there's lots of cool stuff. He's got Bevel and Form and a couple of cool sub brands under that people should check out. I think they're doing a nice job.
Nice. Are they HubSpot customers?
I don't think they're HubSpot customers yet, Unfortunately. We've got a bunch of cool brands that are, but I think they're just somebody I admire doing awesome stuff.
No, I think that's really cool because I wanted to clarify that because we try to be honest brokers here, right?
Oh, totally.
If it's a client, that's wonderful. But if it's not, that's wonderful too.
Yeah,
anyway,
for sure.
Hey, speaking of folks, so while you were doing your podcast, did you ask your team to listen to them?
Yeah, absolutely.
And did they?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. Just checking. Okay. So what do you read and how do you consume information?
Yeah, this goes back to what we were just talking about a couple minutes ago, right? That to be great in marketing today, you know what you have to do? Learn and learn constantly. And so I want to deep dive with people and understand how they learn stuff. Like, how do they consume information? Are they good at consuming information? Do they have like certain processes or infrastructure that enables them to learn a lot of stuff and learn it quickly? I find that to be incredibly valuable. It's one of my personal kind of like, if you're going to call it a life hack, it's like I try to have the right infrastructure that enables me to know a whole lot of stuff really quickly and get access to the right stuff for me. And so I want to see if people have their own kind of stuff set up like that. Okay,
so inquiring minds want to know, even though you have a 3-year-old, what do you read?
I read so many things. So I try to read more books these days because I think long form content is awesome.
Anything in particular come to mind?
I'll give you the most recent book. Just about finished reading is a book called White Fragility. It's a book about how white people are bad at talking about racism and all the reasons white people are bad about talking about racism and what white people should do to, help society talk about and have a healthy dialogue in race. And so it's like this very deep and heavy subject, but man, the author approaches it in a way that really puts a different perspective on it and it helps, I think, the reader think very differently about it. So I appreciate the content subject matter. I also appreciate the structure of the arguments and everything and the research and everything around it as well. So that would be a plug. Awesome book. If you've not read it, you should check it out. And then in addition to that, I use Flipboard as kind of my core aggregator. There's a bunch of aggregators out there. I use Flipboard. I've got a bunch of custom channels, both on marketing, hobby stuff, food, wine, watches, things like I was talking about before, local news, Boston stuff, since I'm a Bostonian, and I aggregate all of that. And then I've got a pretty great network on LinkedIn, so I consume a bunch of stuff through my LinkedIn feed as well.
And do you try to allow a certain amount of time in your day for information consumption?
I do. I try to spend about 10 to 15 minutes in the morning, and then another kind of 20 to 30 minutes in the evening in terms of kind of information consumption around tech news or marketing industry news or even local market news. And then, I try to pull myself out of that the best I can and then try to get to some longer form content, whether that be a book, a research report, something else that is kind of sitting, waiting for some more kind of in-depth review.
And it's funny. So I listen to books and podcasts. So and I have a relatively short commute in the city here, but one of the things that I've noticed is that if I don't leave any time in my day to just sort of think without listening, or things that you can get overload.
Oh, for
right?
sure.
And so I think it's really something important to imagine and manage. Recently, by the way, a newsletter went out, and I confessed that I listened to podcasts and things at 1.25 speed, but not 1.5, which a friend of mine does, because that's just too.
1.5 is intense, man. I don't think I can do 1.5. I've tried some, and I'm not there yet.
Yeah, no, I can't. It's Alvin and the Chipmunk time. It's just, I can't absorb it. My brain's not. The guy who recommended that speed to me is way smarter than I.
Me too. I can't do it.
But I think there's a couple of things I wanted to mention. One, and in the fact that you brought up the white fragility, that we don't need to keep reading marketing books. In fact,
no.
To the listeners out there, the CMOs out there, oftentimes I love just, good, really well read, written fiction.
Oh, for sure.
Just to clear your mind and look at a character, and it will free your brain sometimes, because most business books are written with a notion of, I'm going to give you a formula, and you're going to buy into this bottle of hope that you're going to be able to follow that formula and it will be successful for you. And there are a lot of formulas with a lot of hope out there, and you just have to be careful that you don't go from book to book and theory to theory. It can get overwhelming. So anyway.
No, I totally, and I would put biographies into that camp too. It's always really interesting to learn about how folks did it in a way that's not very prescriptive. And I think biographies are very good at capturing that. And you can kind of get the essence, and you kind of have your own takeaways around success, which is cool.
So I'm obsessed with Ben Franklin. So I've, always make sure I read at least one book that has something to do with him every year. Yeah. And do you have a person or that from a biography standpoint that you absorbed lately that was just amazingly inspiring?
I really liked the Shoe Dog biography. I really liked the Phil Knight biography. I thought it was really well done. I thought the tone of it was incredible, and just I thought the underpinnings of how they built that brand and that business out of thin air was just super, super fascinating to me.
It's funny. My dad read it and has been recommending it to me for a while, and I now I'm going to have to put it on the list.
You got to go check it out. It's well worth the time.
All right. So I'm going to take a break, go order that book on Audible. And then when we come back, we're going to continue with some of the interview questions that Kipp finds helpful in separating the wheat from the chaff. So stay with us.
Hey, it's Drew. I was at a conference the other day, and somebody looked at my saw lapel pin and said, "What's up with that?" And I said, well, what's the one thing that marketing has always had to do? Forget digital, forget all this stuff. What is the one marketing imperative? And he looked at me and went, "Cut through." And I went, "Yes, ding, 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 ding. That's right. Cut through. That is what marketing must do." And it's not just cutting through the clutter, although that's really important, because if your marketing doesn't cut through the clutter, it's like the proverbial tree in the forest that falls and nobody hears it. But it's also cutting through the crap and the processes that inhibit innovation. We've been working a lot lately with some CMOs to help them cut through the crap and get at the essence of what is their big idea. And how can they make a case to expand that idea across their business? That, to me, is cutting through.
All right, we're back for the last segment of this episode of Renegade Thinkers Unite with Kipp Bodnar. We've been talking about interview questions. Now, let's step back from this a second as we get. Let's imagine you were interviewing a number 2 person for brand. Because so often we don't talk about brand anymore.
Sure.
What is there a go-to question that you have that helps you identify, this person's ability to think?
So this is interesting. So I'm glad we're going here, because I wanted to talk about kind of senior level hiring. There's not a go-to question. Honestly, at that level, I want to spend an absurd amount of time with that person. Like,
it makes sense.
I want to spend probably 20 to 30 hours over the course of several different sessions. And in all different settings, presentation setting, interview settings, dinner setting. Like, I want to do the deepest of deep dives on them. And so I'm going to cover I'm going to have probably 10 questions or more for every kind of different facet, a different type of conversation we're having. So it's probably, there's no silver bullet there. That's where you really just need to get and dive and understand the essence of who that person is, how will they really contributed to the work they've done in the past, and what they really are motivated by in the future.
20 to 30 hours.
For sure.
Wow. So, the old saying of hire slowly and fire quickly, you are definitely in the hire slowly camp there.
Oh, yeah. But I'm going to do all of that in the course of probably like a week or two. Like I'm doing that like it's not drawn out. Like but I just want a lot of time with that person. I want to spend a bunch of time. I want to know who they are. I think it's worth it. I think if I'm going to be working side by side with them for the next several years, at least, hopefully, I want it to be a good decision.
Totally. And are there any traits that you have found that have separated the folks that end up making the cut and those that don't?
For sure. I think when you're looking to hire somebody at that level, it's like, man, if they're getting pretty far in the process, they have pretty high aptitude. They're likely very good at marketing. The things that normally separate people is like, are they a really remarkable leader? Some are often very good managers, but not good leaders. They're not somebody that people want to follow, that in the times of difficulty that people are going to rally behind. And that's those characteristics. And that's why it's like, I'm going to spend hours with references and past employees and like all those things to really get a sense of that. But it's honestly the leadership skills, their humility and ability to continue to learn and motivation to continue to learn that really are normally the deciding factors, along with just the kind of baseline, like, is this person a great marketer?
Interesting. I as you were talking, what I was thinking about the leadership and so forth. I mean, clearly these folks have to be curious. I mean, right, and that so that they are lifelong learners. And with you asking all of these questions, how do you figure out if they're good listeners?
So if they're good listeners, well, I normally try to do a few things on that front. I think you get the best perception on the listening front is talking with people they've worked with in the past. So people in the past who've been their CEO or CMO or VP of marketing that they've worked for, as well as people who've worked for them. That's probably number one. The other thing is, I will normally, for that kind of executive level process, I will give somebody a pretty deep briefing and pretty deep background on the business and the situation and the team and everything pretty early on in the process. And so I can see in terms of how they call back to that, how they reference it, how they come back, with kind of unprompted suggestions around that, how well their listening skills are as it relates to kind of the whole overall process.
And I think that's really, it's interesting. And as folks are looking, and this is particularly true for young folks as they're preparing for interviews, they're so busy thinking about their answers that they're often only concerned with the way they shape the words, which is important. But ultimately, if we can't listen, you can't lead and you can't be managed. So somehow or other, you need to communicate that you can listen and that, you can't be a leader if you don't listen. And so that's an interesting little challenge that folks face in interviews in general, right? Is they're so busy wanting to, hey, I've got the answers to your questions and I'm really smart and I'm talented. I'm a leader.
The great thing is that there's, I think, a pretty clear way to show that. The questions that you ask back are indicative of how much you've listened and how much you've grokked the situation, right? And too often people come in with these like kind of canned questions that are written on a notebook before they've ever met me or you or whoever they're interviewing with, right? And it's like the people who are jotting a few things down while we're having a conversation, and then when it comes time for them to ask some questions, like they take a second, they kind of take that idea and form it into a question and hit it back to you. Like those are people that are passionate, are good at listening, and good at formulating ideas quickly.
Yes. Okay. I'm going to sort of, as we sort of get to some more tips for interviewing, both asking good questions as well as responding to them. Let's think of sort of 3 tips that someone was interviewing at HubSpot. How would they prepare for the interview?
If somebody's interviewing at HubSpot, what I would hope that they would do is, we're a software company, and we have a bunch of awesome free software. So I'd hope they'd go and use the product and get an understanding for what the product is, the value that it offers, maybe the opportunities and challenges that face our prospects and our customers. Would love that. They would prepare by seeing if they have any friends or connections that work at HubSpot and kind of getting a more kind of firsthand account of what it's like to work here and understand that that's the right environment for them. And I'd hope they'd do a little just content research on us. They'd read our culture code, take a look at the marketing we're doing, take a look at the homepage, our blog, social, all those fun things, so they could come with some interesting recommendations.
Nice. Okay, those are really, so use the product, do your homework in terms of friends and connections, and understand the culture and make sure that you're a good fit. I think that's so important. And then once you sort of understand the culture, you can sort of embody that in the way that you answer your questions. All right, I'm going to get back to one of the questions that you asked, which is, our CEO wants you to evaluate our blog. What would you say?
Yes, the transition from what we were just talking about, right? Which is like, have you read the blog? Are you up to date on it? Like, what's your perspective on it? And are the ideas interesting? What ideas are missing? Do we have some technical SEO problem that needs fixed? There are a bunch of different things you can interpret by just looking at a blog for 10 to 15 minutes. And this question is to understand, did they do it? And if they did, what lens did they do it through? The ideas, the quality of writing, the design, the technical merits, page load time, SEO, those types of things that kind of give, also depending on who you're interviewing, they're going to have a certain lens on that based on the type of role you're hiring for.
Okay, so second to last question for you. What's the main relationship between marketing and sales?
Great question. It depends on the company, right? Like, it's interesting.
All right. So what is it at HubSpot?
So what's interesting, like at HubSpot, we've got like this interesting 3-team triangle because we have this freemium business model and we've got all these awesome free products. So our product team is just as tight with marketing as the sales team. And so like the 3 of us have this like really interesting triangle of like, how do we all work together really closely? And the simplest way that I think about it is that, of the 4 kind of prospect core facing teams, product, marketing, sales, customer service, product and marketing's job is a one-to-many job, and sales, a customer service job, is largely a one-to-one job, right? And so I look at that, and when we have our gatherings, it's like, what are the one-to-many problems? What are the one-to-one problems? And kind of where are the connection points between them, so that, if our sales team's like, we don't have enough leads, that's a one-to-many problem. Like if we're failing to drive the right conversion rates from people using our free products and things like that, like that's a product marketing is going to work it out, go look at the data and come up with some recommendations. Where it's like, it's a broader problem where it's just like, we want to evolve how this part of our go-to-market works. Then I think what's worked really well for us is coming together in partnership and saying, okay, well, now that we have both product sales and marketing all at the table, what's the strategy that's going to enable us to use those kind of collective talents to win?
That's really interesting. And again, this fascinating world of marketing that we're in is that marketing is not this isolated thing that you can just go off and do. And I love that vision of the triangle of marketing and product and sales. And it's so interesting over the last couple of years as I've interviewed CMOs, some have been responsible for product development. In some cases, some have been responsible for sales. The successful ones always have, a really strong relationship with sales, and there's such an interdependency there. So all of that makes sense. So I guess my last question for you is, if you were interviewing for a job, what's the one question you would hope they would ask you?
The one question I'd hope they'd ask me. This is a very good question. Congratulations. This is one that has me officially thinking, because it's not an easy one. I think I'd hope that they'd ask me. That's a good question.
While you're thinking about that, I'll tell a story. Please. So we were talking about this. So there's a famous baseball moment where the announcer says, "The Dodgers won the pennant. The Dodgers won the pennant." And it was famous because, the Giants won the pennant. The Giants won the pennant. This was the New York Giants playing the New York Dodgers. And in that moment, Ralph Branca, the pitcher, threw a pitch to Bobby Thompson, and Bobby Thompson hit a home run. And what happened, fascinating story, so that's why the Giants won the story. But it turned out that the Giants were stealing the signs. And so Bobby Thompson knew that a fastball was coming, so he prepared for a fastball, and he hit it. And it's funny, he was guilty all his life, and Ralph Branca it never bothered him at all, even when he found out about it. But the idea here is that you want someone to throw that fastball at you, and you know it's coming. And so that was sort of what this is the fastball that you know is coming question.
I love it. My answer is one that I think I would want to be asked, and I hope that everybody want to be asked, which is, what do you think that you need to be successful in this role?
Nice. And so that enables the person who is doing the interview to explain what the job is about and what their expectations are.
Well, yeah, if I'm interviewing, with a CEO to be their head of marketing, what I want that CEO to know is that, there's a level of commitment and investment from a company to be successful in marketing. And the fact that they care enough to ask and kind of hear about what that actually looks like, and can make a decision if they're actually willing to do that or not, I think is actually very important.
Interesting. It's great. It's funny. I switched roles again in that in your answer, and I totally get it now. All right. Well, look, Kipp, it's been great having you on the show. He and I, we're going to do another show some point soon enough, so stay tuned on that. We're actually going to talk about inbound marketing, what all of that is. But this I thought was really great to focus in on interviews. And I'm encouraging the audience, if you have a great interview question, send an email to drew@renegade.com. We'll love to include those in the show notes later on, and begin to get a collection of those, because I do think it's an art. I think it's one that Kipp obviously thinks is an art, and refined, and based on the continued success at HubSpot, I suspect you have a pretty darn good team that you've been able to assemble.
We have the best. I love working with all of them. It's awesome. The only other thing, Drew, I'd add, because we talked all this time about interviewing, the thing we talked about was assessing whether people were good or not. The other thing is, once you've assessed if people are good, you got to sell them. You got to close them. And, that's when the marketer's got to put on their sales shoes and get that person excited about the job. And that's the other underappreciated, underestimated part of recruiting and interviewing.
Well, and I think that's really, I'm so glad you brought that up, because part of that is how you form the questions. If you ask smart, original questions, they're going to say, oh, this is a smart, original person. If you ask the sort of cliche questions, and if you ask sort of them in an obnoxious way, you're going to say, I don't want to work here.
Totally.
This guy's a jerk. So anyway, that's a great point. I appreciate that. Yes, we're always buying and selling at the same time
For sure.
when we're doing interviews. So, all right. With that, again, thanks for being on the show, Kipp. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Awesome, Drew. Thank you so much for having me. Thanks to everybody who took the time to listen today.
And to all the listeners out there, as always, share the show if you enjoyed it, write a review, and until next week, keep those Renegade thinking caps on and strong.
This has been Renegade Thinkers Unite, but it doesn't end there. Just go to renegadethinkersunite.com for more and subscribe to the show. That way, you'll never miss an episode. We'll talk with you next time on Renegade Thinkers Unite.